Our guest today is the chairman of the Illinois Commerce Commission. He has served as chairman for nearly 3 years. Our guest today has devoted his entire adult life to public service. He has served as state representative for 6 years, mayor of Rockford for 4 years. He was also city attorney in Rockford, and director of the the EPA for 6 years. He earned his bachelor's degree with honors from the University of Tulsa and graduated with honors from Marquette University Law School. We are honored that he brought with us his much better half, Tammy, who is with us today. Let's give her a round of applause, a great welcome from the City Club. Ladies and gentlemen, Doug Scott. Doug?
Thank you very much, Jay. I really want to thank you for the invitation to come back and for the great introduction, and to Dr. Green. Always a pleasure to see you, and really look forward to the question and answer, because you and I have a lot of fun doing that. But thanks to the City Club. It's great to be here. I really want to thank Tammy for coming with me. I think this is about the 6th time maybe I've spoken here at the City Club, and I think Tammy's made about half of them, and she comes every once in a while just to make sure I don't ruin the family brand or anything. So, but always great to be with Tammy. And I know you mentioned Commissioner Sharina May. Commissioner Ann McCabe is also here. Commissioner. They're here to make sure I get my facts right. It's fantastic working with them. We've got a really good group at the commission. We work well together. We certainly don't always agree on everything. Some days it doesn't seem like we agree on much of anything, but that's okay. And we have a good way of discussing the cases and bringing out all of the information. So it's made for a really good working experience. And so I really appreciate Sharina and Ann and all of the work that they put into this job as well. I also want to acknowledge in any organization, as all of you know, there are lots of folks that do tremendous work and don't always get the recognition. I'd like to shout out to Nicole Lucky and Suzanne Stelmazik, who are my legal and policy advisors. And Megan McNeil is also here. She is one of Commissioner May's policy advisors. So Megan, I think Denisha Anderson was here too. So let's give them a round of applause, because they do a tremendous amount of work, and it's great to see all the elected officials and all the rest of you here as well. Thanks again for having me back. I think I've been here in 3 or 4 different jobs that I've had. So hopefully, no matter where down the road it takes me, you keep inviting me back, because I always enjoy being here. A couple of quick housekeeping things. Those of you who have seen me speak here and other places before, or seen other commissioners speak, know that we have these really pesky things that are the docketed cases in front of us. And so just like judges, as you know from some of the past experiences I've had here, we can't always talk about everything that maybe you and I would both want to talk about. And so if we get near one of those things, I may have to respectfully decline to answer something, because we can't talk about cases that are pending in front of us. And then I see former Chairman Phil O'Connor is here, and I know Phil hates this, so I'm going to do it while he's here. But they always make us do this disclaimer. You know, the lawyers, and I'm a lawyer, and so I apologize to all the lawyers in the room, but have to do this disclaimer about how what I say is only my own opinion and doesn't represent the commission, and so just pretend you heard all that. And besides all of that, the people that work with me say, well, heck, Doug, you don't believe half the stuff you say, so why should anybody else? So the last time I was here, it was a very, very different world. The Cubs didn't have a mascot yet, and I know that's paramount on everybody's mind, but this is, in all seriousness, this is an incredibly exciting time for us at the Illinois Commerce Commission. And those of you in the room that work on energy issues, and you know from the introductions, there are a lot of folks in the room who work on these issues. You know what a really fascinating and exciting and very changing dynamic we have right now in these industries. And there are literally dozens of issues that we work on that I could talk about here this afternoon, but I'm going to touch on just a few that are going to going to really have an impact on energy in Illinois and are really top of mind to us at the ICC. Unfortunately for you guys, the licensing of repo men is not one of them. That is something that we do, and I know that's what you want us to talk about today, but maybe you can have me back and we can talk about that, because frankly, there are some really good stories in there too. So, as you know, at the ICC, a lot of folks don't know all of the things that we do, and started off regulating railroads and picked up utilities and do a lot of different things. And I think really I can describe it for a time as whatever everybody else didn't want came to the ICC. So we do lots of different things in addition to just the utility cases. So today I'm going to focus on some recent legislative initiatives that have come through the General Assembly that involve energy policy in the ICC. And really, by extension, involve just about everybody in the state. Then I'm going to talk about some policy sessions that we have been having and are going to continue to have that focus on some of the important and emerging issues that we're dealing with. And then finish up with a little deeper dive into discussions on two of those things that we've been discussing in policy issues, some of the new US EPA regulations for limiting greenhouse gases and the changing dynamics of the utility industry itself, and then obviously look forward to your questions. One of the goals that I've had in the 3 years that I've been at the ICC was to have us look forward and spend some time on issues that are going to be coming to us and are going to be affecting citizens in Illinois, and look at things that'll make sense for us to make some changes. I mean, obviously we have to react. We're by nature a more reactive type of agency, reacting to the cases that are before us, and that's still our primary job, and we do literally hundreds of cases a year. But it's not our only job, and it's not our only role, and we think it's very important also to do our job and look to balance the interests of the ratepayers with the interests of the utilities. That's our primary function. But to do that, we have to do some things that I think go beyond just looking at the normal rate cases that come to us. And one of the ways to do that is through the legislation that comes through the General Assembly or federal Congress as well. Now, last year when I was here, I couldn't talk about the Formula Rate and the smart grid legislation, as we had a docketed case before us that was interpreting that statute at the time, and I'm not going to get into the details of that law today. But as you may recall, there was a pretty large disagreement over a couple of sections and the way that we at the Commission had interpreted those sections. The General Assembly passed a resolution saying that's not what we meant when we passed the law, what you at the ICC said. And while we looked at it and said, okay, well, we don't read it that way, we don't think that's what it means, instead of being defiant with the General Assembly, what we did was to write back to the Senate President and say, well, we understand, but here's why we came to the decision of what we think this means. If you mean it to be what you've got in the resolutions, let us help you write the language that will actually mean what you are intending it to mean. And that's a little bit of a departure for us as a commission, but I thought that was very important, because ultimately our job is to interpret the laws the General Assembly passes. And so if they want to get their particular law into a different place, they certainly have the right to do that. And I thought it was important for us to help with the language, to eliminate a lot of the big consternation that was going on with those cases at the time, but secondly, or B, to make sure that what we were doing is establishing a pattern of making sure the General Assembly knows you can go to us in advance on these issues, and we can talk through all of these legislative issues, and I think come up with some changes sometimes to some of the legislation that will help avoid some of the issues like we saw in the smart grid legislation case. And so we really took that approach during the last legislative session. Of the dozens of bills that touch energy policy, I'm just going to highlight a few of them, which a lot of the folks in the room worked on today. One of them was the natural gas infrastructure rider, which I know is very important not only to a lot of the companies that are here today, but really affects everyone everywhere in the state. And the idea behind this was to provide a better system for the gas companies to be able to replace older pipes and older systems. There are a lot of good reasons to do that. That has a very beneficial effect in a lot of reasons. First of all, being safety. You hear about the things that happen in other states. You hear about the disasters that happen when gas pipes and mains break. We thought it was important legislation, and so we worked very hard with the sponsors of that legislation and with the companies to try to get those pipes replaced. We had the opportunity to go out on a field trip looking at some pipe replacement, and it's really pretty scary, some of the things that are out there. As you can imagine, a lot of the pipes were put in, some of them over 100 years ago, that are still in the ground, and we really need a system to be able to replace those pipes on a more regular basis. There was one case where part of the pipe had been repaired, I'm not making this up, had been repaired with what amounted to paper mache. Wet paper that was allowed to harden over the breach in a pipe, and that was what passed for a repair to a gas pipe several years ago. So it's really critical to get a better replacement of those. The companies don't always have the means to be able to accelerate that replacement process, and this legislation really helped them do that. And the cold days of late remind us how important that gas distribution system is. The second bill was a bill on water utility acquisition valuation, which is a fancy way of saying a better way to allow smaller water companies to be able to sell to some of the companies that provide water services in many of the communities throughout Illinois. And this isn't a takeover. These are willing sellers and willing buyers, but the way that in the statute, the valuation of those smaller companies was set out in the statute, it really didn't it didn't make business sense for the larger companies to be able to buy them. That's important in a lot of respects as well. I used to see this as a mayor, where sometimes around Rockford we would have these little pockets that didn't start out in the city. They'd have their own water system. It might have been for a subdivision, it might have been for 10 houses, and as time went on, the owners changed hands, the people who ran the system changed hands. Very often we were ending up with very inexperienced people running these systems, highly undercapitalized folks running these systems. They couldn't make improvements to them. It has safety, it has environmental issues with that as well, and I saw that all the time when I was at IEPA. And so I think this is a good bill because it also allows if the larger companies are able to acquire some of these facilities, it allows them to capitalize. They have access to capital at a much better rate than some of the smaller entities would, and allows them to recapitalize and make some of the necessary improvements to improve the drinking water quality that they have. So again, we think that that's something that, and yes, rates will probably go up for most of these places, but because they've had so many repairs that they need to do and so much of an upgrade, they're actually getting a better quality product as well. At least that's the goal. Third bill was the water utility rate customer notice when larger water and sewer companies are going to go through a rate increase. There's a new notice provision for the customers that are there. We think that that's very important. Obviously this is what we do all the time, and so when cases come to us, there's an assumption that everybody knows what's happening and everybody understands that this rate case is coming. That's not always the case, and so there's a further notice provision now that ended up in the law. And then there was a telecom rewrite as well, working on a lot of issues that are important in the telecommunications industry. And that's an industry that also, as we start talking about the electric utilities a little bit later on, telecommunications is also an industry that's gone through a substantial change. Just think about your own experience and how many of you still have I don't need hands or anything, but how many of you still have a landline in your house? But there's still all of the copper and all of the wires that end up going to those houses, even if you don't have the landline there. And so somebody's paying for that infrastructure, somebody's maintaining that, even though the industry has changed. And so it's important to do that as well. The reason I highlighted those four bills was because they all started off incredibly differently and different looking than what they ended up in their final passage. We believe all of those bills ended up in a good place in terms of striking that balance between the interests of the companies in providing the reliable and safe and economic service and the interests of the customers in being able to get that service. Our executive director, Jonathan Feipel, and our legislative staff, I think, did an excellent job working on the exact language with legislators and with all of the parties that were involved in these bills. And as I said earlier, we want to make sure that we're a resource that people can go to, and that avoids a lot of problems later on when the bills are done again. And we're going to continue to do this on legislation that comes up this year. There's a fairly major piece of legislation that's coming up that Senator Harmon has, which is a fix of the renewable portfolio standards bill. I won't get into the details of it, but Illinois has been a pretty good leader in terms of developing renewable energy over the last few years, and unfortunately the way the statute is set up is not allowing that to happen now, and so there's some changes that need to be made, and Senator Harmon's been working very hard on that, and we've been working and will continue to work with him and the rest of the legislators and all of the parties that are interested in that legislation as well. So similarly, in addition to the legislative part, we want to play a role as a group that proactively looks at issues outside of the normal confines of a rate case, where we're really limited to the evidence that's presented in front of the administrative law judge at these rate cases. We really want to do a deeper dive into some of these issues that we know are issues now or are going to be issues coming up in the future, and we think that it's really important to try to bring people together, and the feedback that we've gotten is that people like doing this and they like coming to us at other times than just during a rate case to talk about these issues. Traditionally, we only did a couple of them a year. We would do a summer and a winter preparedness meeting, making sure all the companies had enough power to get us through either the air conditioning time or the heating, the high heating months. We're still doing those, but we also added a few, and I'll just mention the sessions that we did last year and some of the ones we're looking at doing this year as well. So in addition to preparedness, we held 2 different sessions on energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, by all accounts, is something that not just here in Illinois, but throughout the country, is something that we all need to pay a lot of attention to for a lot of reasons, from the environmental reasons to the cost reasons, being able to cut down on our electric costs. And we really do have very good energy efficiency programs here in the state. We just had some rulings on the programs that are out there that are run by Ameren and by ComEd and by Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. We just did those decisions last week, and so we're really looking at these programs very carefully. And it really also, in addition to all of those reasons for doing it, energy efficiency is a great job creator, and I know that's something that we're all extremely interested in the state. Now, before we start talking about energy efficiency and jobs, I know you've all got in your mind the guy with the tie-dyed shirt and the Birkenstocks driving the Prius that has the faded Gore Lieberman bumper sticker on the back. That's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about HVAC people and electricians and carpenters and people that are in buildings trying to retrofit them so that they use less electricity, or working with companies on our second policy session that we did on combined heat and power, working with big businesses that use a lot of electricity but end up having a lot of wasted heat, capturing that heat and being able to use it for other processes. That helps everybody out. That's great for the environment, it's great for these businesses, it's great for the costs that they incur, and it's something that we want to try to encourage even more in Illinois. So we had get everybody together who touches that area and bring them in and talk about, all right, how are the laws set up? How are our regulations set up? Are there different things that we could do? Are there different laws that we could see? How can we make this work better? And I'm really been pleased by what we got out of those sessions as well. Another session was on smart meter implementation, which is obviously happening now in the ComEd service territory, and actually it started in the Ameren service territory as well. We talked about some issues of safety there, but also and got what I thought were some very good answers about the safety of these meters as they're being installed, but also new pricing structures. What can be done with them when they're in? What consumer benefits can come Because remember when we debated that law back in the legislature, one of the things that was out there was when you have this extra data and you have this more information about what a customer's usage is, some of these competitive energy suppliers and others can help develop some plans that can really benefit these individual consumers or this group of consumers. And so we really wanted to have a session that explored those issues in greater detail. Yet another one that Commissioner McCabe really led the charge on was on resource adequacy and energy markets. Do we have enough resources? Will we have enough resources in the future? We're a competitive state, as you all know. You probably get some of the solicitations from some of the alternative retail energy suppliers, or you live in a city that's done a municipal aggregation agreement and you have an alternative supplier now. In the old days, and what a lot of other states do, they actually bring the utilities in every year and sit down with them and plan and say, all right, we think we're going to need more transmission lines, or we're going to need an additional power plant built in the state somewhere. We don't do that because we don't regulate the generation of electricity anymore. And so by doing things like this, we're able to start getting at those issues, which even though we don't regulate them, are still very important to us and to all of you. And resource adequacy certainly one of those. And just last week, we held a session, the first of at least two, I think we're going to have, on supplier diversity in utilities and their procurement practices, a really important issue, not just in the utility industry, but you're seeing that throughout state government taking action with lots of other different industries throughout Illinois. Commissioner May and Commissioner DeValier did a wonderful job of bringing together some folks to talk about that issue, and now we're going to have another session where we talk with the utilities about it as well. Representative Will Davis and Senator Marty Sandoval. There was actually a bill that was passed 2 years ago that allows for some reporting by the utilities. They've got a bill now that expands that a little bit more, and so we wanted to have them in, and Representative Davis was kind enough to join us. We wanted to have them in, explain what their bill would do, and then we can use that as a basis for working with the companies as well. Obviously, the idea is to make sure that we have some diversity in procurement. Illinois, we'd like to be on the forefront, not, as I said, not just here with utilities, but in other industries as well. And again, thanks to Commissioner May and to Commissioner DeValier for their work there. Tentatively planned for 2014, we've got the alternative retail supplier consumer protection. We have a scorecard on our website where you can actually go and see how a particular retail energy supplier, alternative supplier, how they stack up in terms of the other suppliers, in terms of the number of complaints that are against them. It's some of the information that we can help provide to consumers as they're looking to shop for an alternative supplier, just like folks shop for all kinds of other products as well. But we want to make sure that there's not more to be done. Obviously, the suppliers who are doing it right want to make sure that there isn't more that needs to be done either, because if you get people out in that industry who are doing it the wrong way, that hurts the entire industry. And so the folks that are doing things the right way want to make sure that our regs are also in place to help enforce. Really quick story, my favorite story in this this person just knocked on the wrong door that day. They actually knocked on the door of a person who knows as much about the utility industry as anybody in the state. And this gentleman kept the person from the alternative supplier there about an hour and a half, asking him questions. And at one point, the young guy who was working for the company actually said to him, "Look, sir, if you sign up for our program and sign up to get energy from us, we will guarantee that it will take all of the carbon monoxide out of your energy." See, some of you get that joke and know that because that's a good thing. Nobody wants carbon monoxide in their energy, but it's not really there anyway. He meant carbon dioxide. He was talking about a greenhouse gas element, but that's unfortunately we get some folks who don't necessarily know the industry. They get very little training sometimes. Most of them do a very good job, but sometimes they get very little training, and we want to make sure that consumers are protected from that as well. Then the generation mix, we talked about resource adequacy a little bit, but the generation mix is also important to us. You've got the whole gas revolution, the fracking, and then the regulations that are coming from that. And we've got shale oil plays here in Illinois that we're going to have to pay attention to. But all over the country, that's really changed the pricing of electricity completely. And so gas became the power source of choice in a lot of places where they were making decisions on generation. We actually have very little gas here in Illinois. Outside of renewables, we're about half traditional coal and half nuclear power. And the question I always ask is, well, what's that going to be like in 30 years? Because I'm pretty sure it's not going to be that. So what is our mix going to be like here, and fitting in with the resource adequacy panel that Commissioner McCabe put together? Are we going to have enough to make sure that all of our citizens have access to all the power that they need? And so that's very important as well. And as before I take questions from you, I'm going to just talk about the last two policy sessions that we're going to go into, and we'll probably do more. We've been doing about one a month, and so we will probably continue that as well. But first, the new US EPA regs are coming later this year, and you could do a whole, in fact, I've been at places where they've done whole days on this subject. It really will help to change the power mix throughout the country. In addition to gas prices, it's kind of like a perfect storm of things coming at one time. So traditional coal-fired plants are going to have to reduce their greenhouse gas output. Now that can happen in a lot of different ways, but it can't happen as easily as reducing other pollutants that we normally work on at places like the EPA. So what that means is you may have a lot more plant shutdowns. And if you have more plant shutdowns, what does that do to the reliability of electricity for us, not just here, but all over the country? And frankly, a lot of places are a lot worse shape than Illinois is in terms of complying with this. So I've been part of a number of groups, panels, meetings, and other forums working on this issue. The idea is to let US EPA know before they write the rule, which is scheduled to come out. The guidelines are scheduled to come out in June of this year. But before they do that, how likely is it that people are going to be able to comply with this? This is all going to be done by state plans. Here it'll be written by our state's Environmental Protection Agency with help from a lot of other agencies as well. But how are they going to be able to comply? Are they going to be able to meet those goals that the US EPA sets out? And so I've been part of a Midwestern collaborative. I've been part of a national group that's been run through the Georgetown Climate Center in DC, and many other groups really trying to work on this issue and trying to get states to really focus on this. There are going to be a lot of states that just say, you know, we're not doing any of this, we're just going to challenge it in court. And that's a strategy, but if that doesn't work, they're going to have to comply at some point. And so we're trying to get as many different states together as we can to start working on these issues and thinking about that in a proactive way about how they can comply with that. And a lot of it has to do with flexibility, being able to take credit for the things that I talked about earlier, like our great energy efficiency programs. We were recently recognized by a national entity that rates states in terms of energy efficiency, and we were 10th in the country and the only non-coastal state in the top 10. We're pretty proud of that. As I said earlier, there's more that we've got to do, but I think that's a very good start. So part of our pitch to US EPA is allow those good gains that have been made in energy efficiency to help offset some of the greenhouse gas emissions that we're trying to reduce here, and lots of other flexibility as well. This will affect everything. This affects, as I said, with the shutdowns and changing over. It obviously affects costs, and it obviously affects every person in this room and throughout the country as well. We've been coordinating through the ICC. We've been coordinating other state agencies who touch energy policy to work with the folks at IEPA, who is going to have to draw this plan up. And the flip side is to this is what we call adaptation. And Suzanne Malik McKenna knows a lot about adaptation, having worked on a great plan that the city of Chicago has for what happens if the things that are said to that are going to happen with climate change actually do happen. You know, what does it mean if Lake Michigan water levels rise dramatically? What does it mean if you keep having these major storm incidents or you have more droughts? What does that mean in terms of the diseases, the bugs that don't die, which we're actually seeing a lot of evidence of in Illinois? What does it mean in terms of if you have these major storm events in terms of sewer overflows and other things? So, I mean, these are all incredibly important questions. The governor was just named to a White House task force on adaptation, and so we're certainly working with his office and with other agencies in the state, and we'll be working with the city to incorporate the great work that they have done in this as well. So that's something that we're spending a great deal of time on. And I know, all right, there's at least one person in the room that wants to say, you know, yeah, great with your climate change, Scott. You know, it's been 100 degrees below zero here recently. Don't make Jay have to bring Tom Skilling in to explain the difference between climate and weather. You know, you don't want that to happen. So you can't afford him. That's right. So. And lastly, the second policy issue I want to just touch on very briefly is, and I mentioned it earlier, is the whole changing utility model. And Tom O'Neill and I have talked about this, as I have with Ann Pramaggiore, and we're really looking forward to getting deeper into this subject as well. But if you read all of the stories about what's happening in energy throughout the whole country, you're seeing a lot of things where they talk about distributed generation. What happens when I put solar panels on my house to heat my house? Or what happens, there's a shopping center in Rockford that runs on geothermal energy. What happens when you have wind, you know, your school has a wind turbine to offset some of the energy costs. Much like you talked about with telecommunications, the utility distribution companies, Commonwealth Edison, Ameren, Mid-America, and here in the state, they've got a responsibility, they've got an obligation under the law to serve everyone and to extend their service area to everybody. And that's great. That's part of what we call the regulatory compact with them. For that, they get monopoly status, and then we work on the rates through the statutes, the way that they're set up. But at some point, that level, if people start, if major department stores, for example, start all using solar panels and don't really need the grid in a great way anymore, or when energy storage becomes much more prevalent than it is right now, which will change the game dramatically, what happens to the utility company in that particular instance? We have to worry about that from an ICC standpoint, because there are people that are going to be left at the end of that line who can't put the solar panel on their house. They can't afford to put the wind turbine up. They can't do the geothermal. And so are you going to leave them with all of the bills for all of those lines that are out there if customers leave the grid? That's a huge issue, not just here. It's a huge issue everywhere in the country. There are a lot of states where distributed generation has hit before it's hitting here. They're already dealing with this in terms of other charges that they're giving to customers who are leaving the grid. Maybe they're leaving the grid, but not all the time because the sun doesn't shine all the time, or things don't work, some of the equipment that they have. And then they're not just going to say, well, that's okay, I don't need power today. They're still going to be looking for the utility. How do they build their business model around that? That's an incredibly important question for them. And because it's an incredibly important question for them, it's an incredibly important question for us and for everybody in this room. So we're going to be working on that as well. And just a couple of stats, just to let you know that this is coming. In the last 7 years, the amount of grid-connected solar, so the people that are doing their own solar panels or their own installations, there's been a 4,000% increase in just 7 years. And most of the people that are looking at this issue, because the prices for doing solar power on a smaller level are actually coming down fairly dramatically and have been over the last several years, you can only expect those numbers to continue. You can only expect that to be even more prevalent as time goes on. And so that's an issue that we're very committed to working with the utilities to start to explore, and that's something that we're gonna want to do during the next year as well. It's very possible that the kind of the traditional view of utilities that we've all grown up with, that they all said, people said, Bell wouldn't recognize the phone system if he came back today, but the folks, Insull and Edison, that's pretty much the way I remember it, with the electric system from when they left. That's going to change. That's going to change fairly dramatically. It already is changing and going to change even more so in the next few years. And so we've got all of those matters to have to deal with. And as I said at the beginning, these are all incredibly fascinating, complicated, important questions that will affect every single one of us and all the folks who aren't here today as well, which is yet another example of why this is such a fantastic time to be working on these issues. So I look forward to working with all of you, and I also look forward to your questions. And thanks for having me back to the City College. Thank you.
Well, get that right off the bat. Board Member Saxon probably got a hot question here. You know this guy? We have Jim Underwood from the Illinois Capital Development Board. Where are you, Jim? There you are, right there. Good. And before we get to the questions, this is the first time in my memory that Samuel Insull's name has been mentioned.
How about that, huh?
By the way, for those of you who don't know, he was a very famous Chicago reformer. Okay. They don't know. They don't know. All right. Joyce Saxon gave me a question from Joyce Saxon. In your opinion, will the U.S. be, take two. In your opinion, will the U.S. ever be free from using Middle East energy? 25 words or less.
Very possibly. We talked about the shale plays and the shale gas now that's going on throughout the country. We went from a position just a few years ago where we were talking about importing natural gas and setting up all of this importation terminals. Now people are looking at taking those terminals and turning them around and making them export terminals. It's changed so dramatically. The United States may actually be, if we're not already, we may actually be, in a very short time period, the largest producer of natural gas in the world, ahead of even Russia. So yeah, I mean, it's possible that we could be free of different sources. And as technology changes, people are using fuel for different things. So you say, well, natural gas may not replace oil. Well, it might. You're starting to see natural gas vehicles that are out there. And so, yeah, it's very possible that in fact, most of our oil these days, the largest supplier of oil in the United States is Canada. So I think that's already started to happen a little bit. So I think it's very possible that could happen in the future. I'm sorry, it wasn't 25 words or less.
Yeah, we're running out of time. Try and shorten those. Make it more fill in the blank than essay. Dave Lundy, where are you? There he is, another well-known reformer. What will be the impact of coal retirements and increased use of renewables and efficiency on energy prices? You can handle that?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
It's going to depend a little bit on how drastic the coal retirements are. So if the EPA gives a set of guidelines with their new standards that are coming out in June, that states are going to have to develop plans that they submit by 2 years from June, roughly. If that gives states a lot of flexibility to use things like energy efficiency, to take credit for, say, from 2005 on, the shutdowns that have already happened, then I don't think the retirements will be as dramatic as some of the folks are saying. Actually, I think what happens to gas prices will actually affect coal in the future even more, and whether or not carbon capture technology and sequestration, in other words, burying carbon in the ground after you take it from the coal plants, whether that advances or not. FutureGen is a project in Illinois that's still on the books. The DOE in Washington just recommitted their $1 billion of support to that. If the government continues to fund next generation coal projects, I think coal can still end up being part of the mix for the energy future, and then it won't, the impact won't be as dramatic. At the same time all that's happening, relating to your question, energy prices for renewables have been going down. I mentioned in terms of solar, it's also happening in wind, it's happening in geothermal, and I think you're going to see a much more dramatic impact from renewables in the future, which theoretically would drive all the costs down as well, because people to compete then, we're going to have to compete with the lower renewable prices. So, and from an environmental standpoint, obviously that may be better too. Come on in.
You're not in the legislature anymore. No need to filibuster. By the way, we have 3 more questions. Many of them are written in the Tolstoyan.
The questions are long.
Look at the damn questions. Incredible. Ed Miller, Joyce Foundation. Where are you? Way in the back, huh? Okay, well. Illinois Energy Efficiency, by the way, excellent printing. Illinois Energy Efficiency Resource Standard has a cost cap that prevents utilities from helping customers take advantage of available energy-saving measures. Do you buy the argument that lifting that cost cap will actually save customers more than it would cost? 25 words or less.
Yes, I do.
There you go.
I do. And that's something that we're going to need to work with the legislature on, obviously, because that's statutory. But in bringing together all the folks in energy efficiency, as I mentioned, that was one of the things that they mentioned was something that was really inhibiting the companies, ComEd, Ameren, that are running it. That's something that they point out. So that's something we'll need to work with the legislature on.
I think you may have answered part of this, but he's a member. Patrick Giordano, where are you, Patrick? Patrick Giordano. This is a great country, isn't it, Jay? You get a Patrick Giordano. That's really good. All right. Do you think demand, look at these questions. This is incredible. Do you think, it's a tough job you got. Do you think demand response will be able to help offset peak demand as coal-fired generation shutdowns if regulations go through on greenhouse gas emissions? I'm sure you all understand that question. I'm sure you can answer it.
Again, yes, I do, and it already is happening, Pat. In the region that one of the regions that we belong to in the northern part of the state, we're part of a regional group that oversees the electric grid. And in that regional group, they actually use demand response and a fairly large amount of demand response. And what demand response is, it can take lots of different forms, but the common forms that you'll see is businesses or individuals either allow for temporary shutdowns during peak times or scaling back. You may agree as an individual customer to drop your thermostat or raise it, depending on whether your peak's in winter or summer, by a few degrees to allow for less energy to happen. Just last week and 2 weeks ago, during the cold snap here, there was calls for additional demand response. And so it's already happening to kind of shave that peak power load that's out there. And I think that that's going to be something that they're going to look to do more. You've got to be careful to make sure that it's real, though, that the people that are doing that say, yeah, I know I signed up for that program, but you know what, I'm really cold, so I'm going to keep the thermostat up. So you've got to be careful that those are real. But given that caveat, yeah, I think it will continue to be a large part.
This is the last question. Jason, where are you from? Invenergy. Where are you, Jason? You want to join the City Club. You got to not use acronyms, and you got to print. And you can't use pencil, or else you'll never get through the board. Why don't you stand up and ask your question in 25 words or less? Because I don't know what the hell this is. Go ahead. Come on. Stand up real loud. Come on, Jason.
So the short answer is yes. Let me go back and try to do it in English as much as I can here. So we're part of two different regional transmission organizations. The one I just mentioned is called PJM. That's the one that goes in ComEd service territory and ends up going really through making a beeline to the East Coast from there. The other is called MISO, Mid-Continent Independent Service Organization. MISO really is the southern part of Illinois and then a lot of other surrounding states as well. They operate differently. So what the question involves is the kind of the price to compete, the price to get into the game to sell power in those two different markets is completely different. And so that creates a lot of issues in terms of who the players are that want to sell into those two markets. Yes, that's a concern for us because there are some dramatic differences between the two. There's also been a move of late, as you know, for a lot of MISO companies to want to bid in and sell power into PJM, which has been allowed, but that's getting some pushback from some of the PJM folks as well. And so that's a constant issue that we monitor. We talk to both of the transmission organizations all of the time, and we ask about this issue and many more as it involves those seams between them, and also MISO and where they also have other seams with other transmission organizations. Incredibly complicated. Obviously, the feds have a huge role in overseeing all of that as well, and so we intervene in a lot of cases at the federal level as they're trying to help out with those seams issues. I hope that answered your question, but yeah, it's going to be a difficult issue going forward and one that we're very much aware of and very much working with the organizations on.
How about a round of applause?